Hi, welcome to Silent Generation. I'm Joseph.
I'm Nathan.
And for this week's episode, I got to give idea credit to my friend Alex, who's in the Discord. I forget what his name is in there. But he just kind of texted me, we should do something about the fall from grace of movie theaters, from movie palace to suburban multiplex off of a highway turnpike. And I hope that decline is not like a main theme throughout all of our episodes, even though we were talking about preppers and the kind of like doomerism they have. But I think that movie theaters really track like America and modern America in a really good way.
Yeah. I was sort of struggling to come up with ideas for this episode at first, just because it's sort of like an everyday thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, movie theaters are Lindy. They've been a fixture of American life and public life across the globe for a long time. And I was just like, what's the take? I guess you were thinking of it from a decline angle. And then as I was going through information for this week, I guess what I came away with was just that movie theaters have never had a single golden era. Yeah. There's been things that have been good about them in every phase of their existence.
Yeah. And they're in this weird like cycle. It feels like the same kind of challenges pop up where it's always a war for people's attention and for people's leisure time. And then like other things pop up, mainly like television and small screens. And then this weird relationship between the running of the movie theater and the making of the movie, these like things that should kind of be allies and have been more of allies in the past have this like interesting relationship where it's like basically they have to put two heads together and figure out how to get people back to the movies. But yeah, we can start with a kind of speedy historical overview of stuff. But I find the history part of it really interesting. I hope the listeners do too. I don't know. It's cool to think about this like previous period.
Yeah. I mean, the origins of movie theaters were relatively informal. So vaudeville theaters were places where there were live theater performances. I sort of think of them as being analogous to, say, like a talent show, where there'd be like some acts where people would dance or sing or tell jokes. And they were professionals, the vaudeville performers, but it would be this sort of like random assortment. And so then once technology for movies was invented, they would like bring out a single screen and there'd be a single projector and it would be part of all of the other acts. I think it was usually at the end. These theaters, vaudeville theaters, were like the first to show movies, but they weren't like dedicated movie spaces.
It feels like there's never a hard switch being flipped from like live to recorded stuff. Like it was always kind of, there was this interstitial period of like you'd have a live performance and then you'd show something on a reel. I think that's true of like a lot of the transitions in film. Like just because sound technology comes out, like it doesn't mean that instantly every movie after that is sound. Like there's always going to be a lag period and some kind of like overlap there.
Yeah. And something I've heard about is basically that the special effects used in the film industry, a lot of them were actually developed through vaudeville, like the sort of special effects that they use. Yeah. So there is this history where like they don't really even transition. They just sort of merge into the modern film industry, I suppose.
It's really interesting how like, vaudeville was just this very like working class kind of garish thing. Totally in the tradition of theater, like theater has always been for like higher classes and the masses somehow, but it's always like filtered in different ways. But it's cool, I think, that movies and television owe their origin to the more like unacademic, lower class version of theater, that it wasn't like people producing Shakespeare plays and then that became the engine behind Hollywood. Like, no, it was like very quick, highly entertaining shorts. I don't know, people have observed this before that like in going back to TikTok, it feels like we're like returning to the early days of film. In a way, of the first films were just like someone smiling, people kissing, just very basic stuff. And if you like are really diving to the bottom of the algorithm, it feels you get back to that where it's like funny animal, person making a face.
Yeah. Like when I was reading Main Street by Sinclair Lewis, the main character, Carol Kennicott, she was going to the movies with her husband and she described how like she thought it was dumb because she would just watch some film of like people who could barely eat food and they were dropping it. And it's like, I don't think it's ever been, I don't think that it was like very high-minded at first necessarily. Yeah, so after movies started being exhibited in vaudeville theaters, there started to be nickelodeons that opened up, and these were very popular from 1905 till 1915. And they were single screen movie theaters that were opened in storefronts. And the way I think about them is sort of like, you know, that period of the pandemic where there started to be all of these like COVID testing sites that opened up in these storefronts.
Yeah, just like abandoned, like vacant storefronts.
Yeah, and just like the most random places. And the places where the COVID testing sites largely open in Chicago, since they closed, nothing's really taken their spots.
Yeah.
And like, I sort of imagine it like that, where it's like the Nickelodeons were pretty DIY. Like the chairs that they had weren't necessarily like bolted into the floor, like with modern theaters.
It literally just could have been a store, like a pharmacy or something like that. These spaces were so flexible. You could just like turn it into a Nickelodeon, and they'd have like the aisle down the center and just like a few chairs either side.
Yeah. And the music would oftentimes come from like a phonograph.
Yeah. They just have a guy who would just like drop the needle at the right time. They said that, like, I don't know, there wouldn't be this like live accompaniment or anything. It would be very kind of bare bones. And I think formatting wise, they would just like kind of run it all day. Is from one thing I read, they just like always kept different like film going. You kind of come in, come out, because the stuff was so short. It wasn't like buying a ticket to a specific feature. You know, that was something, I don't know. I realize there's so many parts of movies that like had to get invented at some point, and we take them so much for granted. Like that, the fact that we go to a movie and we see one thing, you know, and there's not a beginning thing and then like an outro, because that was very much like the setup before, because that's how vaudeville shows were. They were like variety acts, basically.
Yeah. And another way that like I think of Nickelodeons being very DIY and opening in a similar manner to like COVID testing sites is like in my neighborhood. Actually, I'm going to put a link to this in the description for the episode. There's a really good blog called like Avondale Time Machine. So it's a blog about my neighborhood and what it looked like in the past. Yeah. And they have a few articles on like the theaters that opened in the neighborhood as well as Nickelodeons. And like my neighborhood is not that big. I think there's like 30,000 people that live in it. It has the same population density as San Francisco. And but it's mostly like 2 or 3 story buildings. Yeah. It's impressive that many people fit in it. But like, yeah, in this article, there's at least like 15 movie theaters that opened in my neighborhood at different points.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, the numbers kind of, as we'll get into it when we talk about like the later theater palaces and stuff, like the numbers just don't make sense to our mind, because like, I don't know, like on the north side of Chicago, I don't know, depending on how you define the north side, like if you're east of the river, feels like there's 6 movie theaters, I would say. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know, depending on how far north you want to count that, but like, it doesn't seem like a lot for the huge amount of population up there. But when screens are smaller too, like there was just a density of these. It's kind of crazy to imagine now. Like, yeah, 15 in a single neighborhood. I also remember when I was reading about like Jewish history in Chicago that like North Lawndale had like 50 synagogues, which I can't even like imagine. They must have all been smaller, but still.
Yeah, I think people used to spend less time inside. I think that like radio and television and now like computers and smartphones, those gave people things to do at home. But like back in the day, like it was probably boring to stay inside all day.
Yeah. You can only read so much.
Yeah.
And then in neighborhoods I've lived in, I guess this wouldn't have been like a super informal one. This must have been built to show things, but there's this place called the Polo Inn, which now is like a restaurant and bed and breakfast in Bridgeport in Chicago on the south side. But then it's absorbed this other building next to it called the Old Eagle Room, is what he calls it. And so he said somewhere it used to be a theater, and it's got very tall ceilings, and it's just kind of a straight like single Chicago lot, 25 feet wide. But that's used as kind of like a banquet space. You could fit up to like 100 people or so in there. And I went there once for a very strange gospel brunch, which is where the like guy who runs the hotel/restaurant has his friend play the organ as he sings gospel songs, and you sing along to it.
Yeah.
And the service was really bad. It was like this teenager who kept on forgetting our order and like came back a third time to ask our order. And then the restaurant owner came over. He's like, "I'm sorry, we're just going to let that kid go." He's just like, "Tell me your order and I'll put it in. Sorry, the kid's got COVID brain fog." So he said it was the strangest encounter. This was like, I guess, pretty close after COVID, but it was just a strange environment all the way. But
But wait, so this reminded you of a Nickelodeon?
So it was the space that this is in, like the gospel brunch, like it has a stage at the end of it, still like a raised little stage. And it must have been called like the Eagle, because the one by you said was called what? The
Enterprise. So in Avondale, near the intersection of like Milwaukee and Diversey, there's what's now like a taco place, a Mexican restaurant. And in the stone on the facade etched above, the doorway, it says the Enterprise. That was the name in the Nickelodeon. So that one, I guess, was sort of built, people who built it thought it was going to be a Nickelodeon for a while, as opposed to the ones that definitely looked a lot more like, it was like a store one day and then it was turned into a Nickelodeon the next.
It feels like a theme throughout a lot of this is like when you build a place, you have a certain idea that like the present phenomenon is going to keep continuing. And it seems like movies and film and the way that people interact with them changed so much that like anything you built seems to be outmoded within like 20 years. Like imagine running an informal Nickelodeon for a bit. You make enough money to be like, all right, now we're going to build a purpose-built Nickelodeon, and then a movie palace opens up next door and you're just like, you've been forgotten about already.
Yeah. So on movie palaces, that's the next sort of theater in the evolution of movie theaters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was like, sometimes it was people who were running Nickelodeons and stuff, or it was like upstarts. But yeah, these are like started in the 1910s, I guess you could say, and then reaching their zenith in the late 20s, kind of like even in the midst of the Depression happening all around it, they were still kind of powerful. And then the Depression kind of caught up with them and created another low period. But yeah.
Movie palaces have a very fitting name because they really do kind of look like palaces. And we'll get into some examples of these when we talk about movie theaters in Chicago. But like, this is what you can envision when you think of like a modern opera house, like velvet carpets, the seats are like ornate, very nice, chandeliers, things like that. Like, and these oftentimes had like live music that was of a higher quality. Like there would be like as many as like a 50-piece orchestra in like a movie palace.
So you'd come in and they'd have that guy playing. And I found on YouTube this interview with an organist, and I realized like kind of the role of an organist was to kind of provide relief for the orchestra, because they have to take breaks. But an organist kind of acts as like a mimicry of an orchestra. And so you don't want to like kind of lose the energy that you're building. So like the orchestra would play, and then you go to the organ, and then you kind of keep things going, and then feature film there. And then the organ would come in, and I think the orchestra would then be rested through the movie, and then they would play the outro. But yeah, it was a kind of like handoff sequence. There was so much care put into like not just the movie you see. Like theaters were just kind of dealt whatever they got from the studios, as we'll kind of talk about the theater studio system. But it felt like they wanted to control every other part of it, of the user experience.
Yeah, they definitely had like better amenities than like Nickelodeons did, but they didn't even have like concessions yet. Like you weren't allowed to have like food or drinks in them because they didn't want people spilling them and causing a mess.
Yeah. It's like, it seems like they were constantly at war with like what class establishments they were, because they were of vaudeville origins, but they had made enough money to be these grand palaces, but they still wanted them to be for the people. A lot of the people who built these palaces will have these like things of, I want the average man to come in here and forget his troubles. And so they had that, but it's also like, but don't mess up the rug either. So it's this constant kind of back and forth. Yeah. So they declined throughout the Depression, but they had a good moment. This is one of the documentaries I watched. They talked about like during the war, it was just one of those things that like, yes, things were tighter, but the money was short. Like there was no way to ration movies, and they weren't consuming like valuable resources that would have gone to the war effort, unless like film was very rare and valuable. I don't know, but it was some like, and people would go to them more to see newsreels as well. That was a thing that would happen before movies. They'd just update you on how World War II was going. And so that really brought everyone together. And that was like a respite for the movie palaces that had been struggling a bit. And so I'm sure they were like going into the end of World War II, like, we're saved. Like everything's going to be better now. Everyone's going to like flock back to the palaces. We're going to probably build even bigger, better, like grander ones, but it's not what happened.
Yeah. I mean, TVs came around and then people just started to watch things at home. And so I think with the inception of televisions, like attendance has gone down. But I don't know. I still think that there's like the other phases we're about to get to, drive-throughs, movieplexes, multiplexes. There are really nice things about those too.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's just like a straightforward like
decline. No, you're right. Yeah. It's like, because I can't imagine a world where like all the movie palaces all stayed open, like even though the world changed fundamentally around them, and that's just the standard way of going to movies. That couldn't have happened. We'll kind of get into like the which ones get to survive and which ones don't. But so it felt like this was one of the fastest post-war changes. In other episodes of the podcast, we talked about how like life changed. Like it took time to build the highways, to build the suburbs, to build car dependence, and then all the knock-on effects that come after that. It affects like the schools you go to. It affects like, I don't know, your urban fabric. It affects politics, everything. But just immediately, like it's so much easier to put a television into a home than it is to build an interstate. It like fundamentally changed lives instantly. And so that decline like happened pretty quickly in the 50s and 60s. And a lot of theaters like only got 20 good years in, basically. Some of them only had 15.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that like it only had to do with televisions. I think part of it too is just that like downtowns became like less important and people started to view them as being unsafe because they were largely concentrated, a lot of them in downtown. And I read a book for this week that I'm going to link in the show notes on like the history of downtown movie theaters in Chicago. And in that book, it's pretty clear that like the downtown of Chicago was the main place to go watch things. And then like at one point there were no operating movie theaters in the Loop at all. And like our idea of downtowns as being a place to work that then gets kind of sleepy at night.
It
was not like that originally.
It's always never been very, not always, but in living in modern memory, like it's never been a very residential place, but it had outside of the 9-to-5 workday purposes. It was like where you would shop and recreate. And now it's just like, nope, you work there. And then you also, tourists go there for the bean. Like that is the purpose of downtown. But I'm joking because now the city is valuing it and like turning it into a residential thing. But
And so after movie palaces, with the decline of people wanting to go in person to theaters, one thing that did draw people to still watch movies in person were drive-throughs, because people had cars at this point. Car ownership was like increasing year by year. And so drive-throughs were pretty dominant between the 1940s and 1960s.
Yeah. And also like population was shifting out to the Sun Belt for the first time. So they have longer seasons that you can do drive-through movie theaters. In COVID, they were briefly kind of resuscitated. There were all these pop-up drive-in movie theaters. I went to one. I saw Jurassic Park for the first time in Pilsen.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, no, it happened.
Okay.
Over in Pilsen. Yeah, it was not huge. I think they kind of knew their time was fleeting.
Yeah.
But I saw it in like October. Like we had like blankets on us and stuff. It was really like, I don't know. It's just when you're racking your brain to do anything in COVID for fun.
Yeah. I went to one drive-in theater when I was a child, and it was like a pretty nice experience. Kind of feels like you're in a movie when you're at a drive-through, just because they're depicted in films so often.
Yeah, it's a very fun like kind of setup for a movie. Yeah, we used to do it a lot in Phoenix, Arizona. I think we went like a lot. And then there was one in Las Vegas. I only ever went there once. One time I tried to go out to the McHenry drive-in, way out there in McHenry County, and then got there and it was sold out and I had to drive all the way back to Chicago. So that was that was not fun. And there's one in Indiana as well. But those also have a kind of, just like the movie palaces had people kind of like rush to their aid and be like, they might be behind the times, but they're beautiful. We can't lose this. There is a little bit of that feeling towards drive-in movie theaters because they had a heyday and then they shrunk because of the next thing we'll get into, which was the multiplex, which is the multi-screen movie theater. So those arose in like the 70s and 80s because before that, like movie theaters would have a single screen, basically all focused towards first run features. And so the movie would be debuted in the largest, nicest theaters in town. It would, run there for a few weeks, and then there'd be a new main movie to show at that theater. And meanwhile, that aforementioned like movie is now a second run movie. It would go to a smaller theater and kind of down and down market throughout a city. But now you could do that all in one building. You could, have one big screen for the first run movie and then act as your own second run theater as well.
And they probably are responsible for, the decline in the opulence of movie theaters, because up until the multiplex, like drive-throughs were just like a parking lot and cost nothing.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, multiplexes, they have never returned back to like the opulence of like movie palaces or even Nickelodeons. I think Nickelodeons look nicer than like modern
the nice
multiplexes.
Nickelodeons, definitely. I think the multiplex are just kind of like leveling with you of like, hey, we've got more screens. We got the movies you want. Like we've got the same concessions. Like you don't need much more than that. It feels like they're telling you that in a way that like.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that like a movie palace could have like more beautiful architecture and more beautiful interiors, in part because they were filling more seats. Whereas a multiplex, I doubt they're even reaching like 50% capacity most of the time they're showing things. Yeah. So I feel like that's maybe why there's a decline in like quality in that way. But no, multiplexes are still good. I think it's a good thing that like you can get like more choice and variety.
Yeah, that's one thing it's hard to say no to. Like we'll talk about the Music Box Theater, but that's like a 2-screen movie theater now. It used to be just one, and they built a little tiny one in the storefront. And I love going to that theater, but before I go, I check what movie is playing, and if it doesn't line up, you know, the time I want to see it and the movie I want to see, then I do not go. You know, like versus other movie theaters where there's like, I could see that one. Like, yes, there can be an agony of choice, but like people need that little bit of choice in order to like really love a place. I think they don't want to be completely railroaded into one movie sometimes.
Yeah. Especially with modern films. If my local theater was only showing like Marvel,
no, but that happens. Like every so often I get I don't know about you, but I get the urge to go to a movie theater. Like, I think you're more pulled by movies themselves. Like if a good movie is in, you want to see it. Sometimes I want to go to the movie theater and I just hope there's like something I'm really interested in. But sometimes I'll like see an okay movie and I'll just be like, I was entertained. I think of this one tweet. I hope I can like find it again, but it's of this guy who's like, I am completely baffled when people say they don't like a movie. Every single time I have paid for a movie and seen a movie in a movie theater, I was entertained. Like, yes, some are better than others, but I have never walked away feeling like I did not get entertained by seeing a large movie on a large screen. I feel like I'm a little bit like that. I don't know. Sometimes I won't like a movie, but I don't feel like completely like I've wasted an hour and a half of my life.
Well, I can tell I'm going to like a movie in advance because the aesthetics are so important to me. And like simply like an interesting world and setting and like nice costumes, that is enough for me to be entertained. Like I don't really care about like the acting or plot if those things impress me in the first place.
I think I used to say that, and then what is it, Babylon? That movie, was it called like Hollywood Babylon or something?
I haven't heard of this.
I forget this one, but I thought that movie was like a surefire, like, you know, even if it's not good, it at least takes place in an old time, which I always like. I always love a period piece, and the costumes look fun and the scenes look like crazy. But the fact that I couldn't keep my attention, like, because the rest of the movie did fall pretty flat. Like I was like, oh man, I am the direct audience for this, and you like mishandled me. Was my feeling there. But yeah, and so like we'll kind of get into like what caused these changes. These didn't just like come from on high. It wasn't like movie studios were saying like, all right, here's the way you're going to watch our movies. All right, now we're changing it. It's more screens this time. It's like this constant feedback loop of trying to figure out what people will watch, what they want. And then also like the very hard trick of giving people what they don't know they want as well with movies, and with the way they watch them. When you had to have a single screen, your movies had to be more mass appeal is one thing. You couldn't really have like a balkanization or a separation of like lots of different genres. And there were different genres for movies, but I think there was much more like crossover for things. But I don't know, one thing, someone was explaining like Bollywood movies to me once, and they're saying that like it's for the whole family to be entertained. Like if the family is going to a movie theater, it's not like, oh, mom and dad want a movie and the kids want a movie. It's like we're all going together. So there has to be, every movie contains action, romance, music. Like there's less of a sense of like different genres and all that. And so you can kind of see that in movies from like 30s, 40s, and 50s. I think there's a lot more genre bending. Like when you look at the Wikipedia thing, it'll say like dramedy, comedy drama. There was more of that. And then I think that the actual like split into the multiplex was a boon for genre movies. But not that those haven't always existed. I mean, horror movies have been around forever. But I think that is one like good aspect of it there. Yeah. But what movie theaters used to do is this thing called block booking, where this is back when movie studios would own theaters And so they could, of course, force their own theaters to show any movie. But for independent theaters, what they did is they would bundle together movies. So there'd be one very good movie that was a surefire hit, and then a theater owner could be like, oh, this is great. Like, can't wait to have this in my theaters. I'm going to make so much money. And then they'd stuff other movies in there that the studios had spent money on. And those are just like mediocre at best a lot of times, or just complete flops. And so that might have been a golden age of like attendance, but like people eventually caught on to these like just mediocre movies. There's some quote about how like that's what made Hollywood in the 40s and 50s. Like it was a great time to make movies. It wasn't an amazing time to actually watch them.
Wait, so were they contractually, the movie theaters expected to show these mediocre movies that were bundled? Or was it like they would buy, say, like reels bundled together, or was it like they had to show the other ones?
They
that
had
were
like
bad
guaranteed
too?
showings. I think they had to at least show it. They couldn't guarantee people buying tickets or anything, but they had to like show. And I think that if you bought the rights to it, you might as well try and show it. But yeah, and you oftentimes like the movies would be in various stages of completion when you would buy a package. Like sometimes you just get a blurb of just the story of it. Other times you could get like a trailer or something. But yeah, eventually the federal government stepped in and said that it was too vertically integrated for movie theaters to own, for movie studios to own their own theaters. And then block booking was also made illegal in the 40s. But it would still kind of happen. You would bundle two movies together, and a theater could say no to the other one, but you just kind of sneak one in. Famously, a case of this was Star Wars, and that was in the 70s. So that's after block booking was banned. But they bundled it with this movie called The Other Side of Midnight, and that was supposed to be the big, good, safe movie. It was a romance based off of a book, and that's just like, all right, like it's not. It could tank, yes, but anything could tank. And then, of course, history goes that Star Wars like blew it out of the water, and everyone now forgets about The Other Side of Midnight, which wasn't that good actually.
Yeah. I can't even imagine living in a world where like our government could do something as simple as that, like to get rid of the block booking and the bundling. Like, we can't do anything now. Mm-hmm. But yeah. And so now we can get into sort of like movie theaters in Chicago and talk about like their history and things like that. So as I mentioned, as part of my research for this week's episode, I read part of downtown Chicago's historic movie theaters. And I learned something pretty interesting. So prior to the Great Chicago Fire in 1866, Chicagoans could choose between three places of amusement. So like three different theaters, one of which being the original McVickers Theater. And so the book mentions that the city's fathers, I guess basically like civic leaders, knew that places of amusement would be the last to be rebuilt. But the McVickers person realized this and then capitalized off of rebuilding it as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. But I think this is an interesting thing that like places of amusement are the last to be rebuilt. Because when I was getting my master's in library and information science in my intro course, my professor had brought up how libraries are important. And one of the ways that you can see that they're important is that they're always usually one of the first things to be rebuilt after natural disasters. Yeah. They're a major priority for civic leaders.
So I thought was so interesting about in COVID is that we had to like, I think cities have a rough hierarchy of what matters the most for a city, you know, libraries, like entertainment, we probably do put at the bottom or something of the kind of hierarchy of needs. But we had to like make that very explicit during COVID. We had to say like, oh no, movie theaters will be the last thing. Like, yes, this was modulated by like the fact that it was an indoor spreading virus. So that made decisions and stuff, but we had to like spell out which industries were more important than other ones, like who gets to go. And I don't think that like, I think we're much better at doing that casually than doing it in a formalized listed way of like, all right, construction can go, but manufacturing has to stop. Like, all these things. But,
yeah. I mean, I always thought that bars should have been the last thing to reopen. But yeah, mm-hmm. I, as a child in high school, I think, like I read Atlas Shrugged, which is really cringe. For people that don't know, she's like a libertarian and a lot of right-wing people like her. But I read the book just because it was an inspiration for the BioShock video game, which I didn't even play when I was younger. I just, because I didn't have like consoles. I didn't play video games when I was a kid. But no, I saw it at a friend's house and thought it was cool. So then I read this book, but yeah, in the book, basically, it's set in a vintage America. It's like set in the 50s or something. But like at the time, it was, I guess, like an alternative present. But in it, like the American public and political leaders, they start sort of like kneecapping capital, and they start like basically like taking resources from wealthy people and all of these other things. And it causes like vast and widespread economic despair. But she mentions in the book that people in the world of Atlas Shrugged, they kept going to theaters, and those were some of the last businesses to remain profitable because people needed escape and entertainment, and they're willing to pay anything to get out of the misery of everyday life.
Yeah, it's one of those like recession-proof things. I don't think that's super true in practice. I think people will like cut back spending on that, but no, like the need to be entertained. Yeah, there's always going to be a need for that. People might spend their money differently.
I mean, the last things that a town will have are bars and churches. And this was really evident to me when I visited Cairo, Illinois, which is the southernmost town in Illinois.
You said it right. That's how they say it there, right?
Yeah, it's spelled like Cairo, Egypt. But
they're very proud.
Yeah, the southern part of Illinois is known as Little Egypt. So they have some towns there with Egyptian names, including Cairo. But yeah, Cairo is like there is... Like, I can't think of a place where like I can't see a road to recovery in like any way. Like strong towns could not fix that.
Oh man, the hardest one. Yeah. That's tricky. That's like, I feel like with those towns, you shouldn't be asking like, why isn't this thriving? You should be like, this is amazing. This is still here. This is amazing. This isn't a ghost town. You know, if it has like no mechanism to
no,
ever
it is
come back.
Pretty much a ghost town. Like it has like a few bars, a few churches, like one restaurant that's a barbecue joint. And for some reason they have a car dealership and that's it.
Wow. I don't know. I think about ghost towns a lot. I was on some Wikipedia journey of like Belmont Avenue in Chicago. Like, who is that named after? And it's like, oh, it's named after the Battle of Belmont in the Civil War. And it's like, that was over the town of Belmont, which is named after Augustus Belmont. And I was like, all right, I'm getting to the bottom of this. But the town is just not around anymore. We fought this whole key battle at this spot, but it was like a low-lying floodplain or something. So it was like a small agricultural town or like shipping corridor or something. And then eventually just flooded and was abandoned. But it's like, so now like Belmont Avenue named after is so much more alive and bustling than like the thing we actually fought a war over at some point. But like town, like we forget about it, but towns can totally die and become ghost towns. There's like a system of doing that.
Yeah, but I mean, as I mentioned in last week's episode in Preppers, cities do outlive usually like countries and governments and even cultures. Like, but yeah, sometimes if they're small and they're new, they fail, but they oftentimes don't.
Yeah, it feels like once cities hit a certain critical mass, like they can't be ended in a way. But also on cities enduring more than like nation states. I was watching some video about Istanbul, and they talk about like the Greeks who lived in Constantinople saw themselves as like erudite, educated, not like the backwater ones in the outer provinces. And then when the Ottomans took control, the Ottomans who lived in, now Istanbul just adopted the same like cultural stuff, and they like kept a lot of the like culture and entertainment going. And then so then the Ottomans who lived there would look at the outer province Ottomans and be like, oh, but they're not living in, Istanbul. They're not really like us. And so it's just like you could import a new group of people and the city's culture kind of needs a vessel for it, basically.
Yeah. Constantinople is really interesting because it like was historically always like multicultural in a way that we think of, like just modern cities being, but they were like that in the ancient world. Yeah. And Rome was too, and a lot of other ancient cities were not like monocultural in the way that we think.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we're talking about theaters in Chicago, I figured I'd run through 3 theaters, and they're all they were all run by the same company at some point, which was Balaban and Katz, and they were just like the most powerful name in movie theaters in Chicago. And so they were founded in like 1916, dissolved in 1970. So it's a pretty good bookend on the kind of like period of time we're talking about with movie palaces.
Yeah.
So I read one thing that said they operated 50 theaters throughout Chicagoland and 100 total, but you think Wikipedia says 28 in Chicago? So
let's go with Wikipedia.
Yeah, that sounds good. But yeah, there were 7 Balaban brothers. I love that name. It's a very like fun name. And then one sister who married a guy named Sam Katz. And yeah, they were like Jewish grocery store owners, which is what my family did when we came to America. But I guess we weren't sharp enough to get into like the Nickelodeon, into the movie palace kind of world.
Yeah.
But yeah. The first one is the Garrick Theater. So that was actually designed by Adler and Sullivan, famous architects. And that was like a 17-story office tower and had a huge theater inside it. And that wasn't like purpose built for movie theaters, but Balaban and Katz took it over and they ran it as a really successful movie theater. But then it, of course, declined in the post-war period, and they wanted to demolish it in 1960, basically to build a parking structure. And friend of the podcast, Richard Nickel, he was this architecture preservationist and photographer in that period, and this was like where he really got his start, was fighting for the Garrick Theater, but he wasn't able to save it. And this was what, like, I think he was a really good communicator when it comes to why we need to like keep these beautiful pieces of architecture, because this is stuff that like there really wasn't a preservationist movement yet. This was like being built post-war. Like we just kind of had a natural sense of like tear things down if they're not immediately making money. We've always kind of had that in America, and that's a good impulse sometimes, but like,
well, prior to the 50s, if something was torn down, it was safe to assume it was going to be replaced by something that was better.
Yeah.
And then after that,
all bets are off. Parking lot is all you get. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he was usually very like, I think, understanding, but he had a very like mask off quote where he just gets mad and Richard Nickel about the people tearing this stuff down. He says, what it really boils down to is taste. The guys who run these buildings have no taste. They do not know the difference between a doorway of mahogany and one of mahogany finished formica. In this day of mass tourist flights to the capitals of Europe where Americans continue to seek culture, can we not open our eyes to our own treasures and heed what is happening to them? I love this guy so much. He was just, I don't know, he really like was ahead of his time. I don't think he was afraid to be kind of like high-minded and obstinate when it comes to this stuff. He would get in fights with other people in the preservationist group if they didn't include like buildings that he thought were worth saving. And there always are going to be hard discussions. You can't save everything. And I think he was always on the side of like, you can save most things.
Yeah. Did he die when this building was demolished, or was it the Chicago Stock Exchange?
It was the Chicago Stock Exchange. He was salvaging architectural artifacts from that and taking photos, and something collapsed and killed him. Yeah.
So that was sad. But yeah, I'm sad that the Garrick doesn't survive, because Louis Sullivan is my favorite architect. And I think that most of his buildings that like were the most beautiful are still standing. Like I really like the Auditorium building. I really like the Cross Music Store. But yeah, the Garrick Theater, I think, was a really big loss. Like if you see pictures of it, it is one of his best works.
Yeah. If it died for anything, it like at least did ring alarm bells for people. Yeah. And there were like court cases. This is the city like stopped the demolition permit because of the preservationists, and that had never happened before. So even stalling it, that was a new like legal process. Like there would like no one had ever stopped a demolition on aesthetic grounds before. Yeah. Before this. And this is like nationwide attention. Yeah, they were like protesting outside of the Garrick Theater. So like people at the time called it the egghead protest, because it was like architecture enthusiasts protesting, which is a really funny image of just people in turtlenecks.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to all of the extant Louis Sullivan buildings in Chicago. There's this really good article that the Art Institute made, meaning like curators who actually know how to do research, because there's buildings on this list that like I've not found anywhere else.
Yeah, it's a good list. Like there's just like industrial random buildings, like warehouses and stuff that he did.
Yeah. Not all of them are pretty, but it's nice to know how many buildings by him, exist in the city.
Yeah.
And then I snuck in one. So the 3 theaters you went with, I snuck in a 4th one here. So I wanted to talk about the Chicago Theater. So this is a really big movie palace that's on State Street in Chicago. And for people who have been tourists or will be tourists, you're very likely to see this. It has a very big marquee, meaning the like sort of overhanging structure that protects people from rain, with like a really big neon blade sign. And then they have chasing lights. So like the blinking lights that like catch your eye and keep moving. Yeah.
The idea is those would like draw people into the theater. Like if you had the lights all kind of pull in towards the sign, which is cute.
Yeah, but it's really iconic because it has the name, the Chicago Theater. I don't think that was the original name. But it also incorporates like this really important symbol of Chicago, which is this sort of Y shape. It's called the municipal symbol. And it's in reference to the Chicago River, which has 2 branches.
Yeah. It represents the confluence of the Chicago River. I guess that happens at Wolf Point. That's the name for that like little point that comes into the Y there. But it's a really cool symbol. Sometimes like I don't know. I've seen some enterprising kind of like made in Chicago stuff use the municipal device. I think we could steal it for merch. Definitely. I think we could add that to something because it's, again, like not something that can be actively copywritten. And you see twists on it sometimes. Like sometimes it won't be a perfect, like sometimes it will be a perfectly divided circle where it's, other times it's more like vertical Y shaped. It's done in a crest form. There's like a lot of, it's such a simple symbol. You can like twist it in fun ways, I think.
It used to be incorporated into the logo of the Chicago Public Library, but then in like the 2010s, we got it rebranded and now it's really simple and boring. Yeah. But I want us to be trad and start using it again.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, I think the Chicago Theater is worth talking about.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those like demonic tourist destinations that like flexible girls and gays love to do the splits in front of.
What is the call?
Yeah.
It just calls to them to do the splits.
I feel like if something is that iconic that you'll just like do the splits on the sidewalk in front of it, like there's something special about it.
Yeah, it speaks to the soul. But yeah, and it's still like, it had its little period of decline, of course, as they all did, but it got renovated. It hosts like it, when it comes to like comedy acts, like single performance acts, like anything smaller than a stadium show, I think the Chicago Theater is about the biggest you can get. So yeah, any headliner comedian who comes through the city is probably going to perform there.
Yeah, because the Chicago Theater was originally built as Balaban and Kat's flagship theater. It was their largest and most opulent.
Wow. Yeah, so then on the smaller end of this period is the Music Box Theater. So that was built in 1929, so that's like in the later kind of period of these. And it was built kind of in the excitement around talking pictures or sound, or talkies as they called them. And so it actually wasn't intended to have like a live orchestra or anything. And they also intended to never play silent films there. And they never did until, spoilers, what happens to the Music Box Theater. It declines, surprise, surprise. It gets abandoned. It gets bought up by enthusiastic movie lovers. It gets reopened in the 80s. And now it's a long-running art house movie theater. It's a pretty classic like Chicago theater. Like by the late 20s, there was kind of an archetype developing for how you did these. Basically, a movie theater doesn't need windows, so why have it tight to the front of the street? You can push that back to the end of the lot, and then that frontage space you have, use the lower level for commercial space and shops, and use the second floor for apartments that you can rent out for income. And that was just kind of pretty standard. It's a very like clever solution for it. So they'd have like a really big marquee and a lobby, and that would kind of take up the length, the depth of the block to get you to the theater part. But yeah, I love the Music Box. It's got a great marquee sign. I like just how old the interior of it feels. It's in an atmospheric style where it's like pretending to have the night sky above you with little twinkling lights. Yeah,
those twinkling lights remind me of Grand Central Station in New York City, which is their like most opulent old train terminal since the other main one, Penn Station, got demolished.
Yeah.
But yeah, Grand Central Station, they have a Zodiac mural on the ceiling with, I think, like 60 or so twinkling lights. The Music Box has less than that, but it still feels like magical. Like in a way where I feel like if there was like a modern display in a theater trying to, mimic the night sky, it would be like a theme park-esque and be gaudy.
Mm-hmm. No, it's like in Las Vegas, there's the Venetian hotels, which has this like shopping center in it where it's supposed to feel like you're walking in the canals of Venice, and they have like a fake canal, but it just smells like a pool everywhere because they have to clean it with chlorine. And it's just like it's a Disneyland fake 90s version of like what they were better at pulling off in the 1920s.
Yeah, they need pond scum.
Yeah. Well, I think the Music Box used to have like a goldfish pond or something. I read too much about the Music Box. But I think that why it survived was because it was small. It was a smaller theater at its time. It was like only 700 seats, I think. There were a lot bigger ones. And so what that means is that like it survived getting chopped up into a multiplex, which happened in bigger theaters. And I think it also meant, since it was small, it wasn't this like insane task to renovate it. Like another Balaban and Katz movie theater, the Uptown, would be, if it was rehabbed, it would be the largest capacity theater in Chicago. Basically, it's huge, but it's such a like gargantuan task that like they're trying to keep it alive. They have a very dedicated maintenance guy there, but like it would take just a huge sum of money to actually do it to any like standard of quality.
But yeah, I've only ever really been to the Music Box a handful of times. One was to see March of the Penguins when I was a kid.
Oh.
That was before it actually won the Academy Award. And then another time was to go see the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So it's one of those like local theaters where like it draws all the freaks who in a very dated way want to like socialize and meet each other through Rocky Horror. I wasn't really a big fan of the live show because it was just people like shouting a lot, and they've clearly seen it 100 times, but I've only seen it like less than 5. And I would have actually liked to pay attention to like what they were saying on screen.
Yeah, that's one of those, you got to do your homework ahead of time on that. You got to watch Rocky Horror in your own home there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got a very like, the idea of the crowd at Music Box is it's like the film nerds, the film bros of Chicago, but it's also very like alt and alternative in its vibe there. It feels like, I know I often go there more in like winter when, you know, it's not so nice out. And I feel like I walk in, it's just like this giant solid mass of just black clothing and tattoos. Basically, like I feel like I'm often wearing pretty light colored stuff.
But in like a Gen X way, right?
No, it's people my age and younger too.
Oh, okay.
It's just like dyed hair, black clothes, like, I don't know, not to call everyone like e-boys or like goths or whatever that can even mean anymore. But yeah, it just feels like it's, for some reason, like they've taken over that space. And you can always tell the bike racks are like completely full out front with like the kind of bikes that those people like bike. I don't know. I'm making a lot of broad generalizations. I should stop. Another thing it's known for, like not famously, but what people kind of complain about is the Music Box laugh, which is that the type of crowd that goes to these like art house movies at the Music Box will like laugh at inopportune times to show how like above it or in tune with it or something. I don't know. But people like say that it keeps them away from the Music Box sometimes because people just like laugh strangely. I don't know how you solve that. I don't know what creates that problem. I don't know what the solution there is.
Yeah, you just have to roll with it. But yeah, another thing on the Music Box is our friend Matt is going to be showing a movie there soon, which is cool. It's called The Last American Possession, which I think he might have sold all the tickets already, but I want to give him a shout out.
Online and it says there's not a lot left. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, maybe some people will want to watch it.
It's a good problem to have though, selling out all your seats.
Yeah.
And then the last movie theater I'll talk about is the Ramova Theater in Bridgeport. I used to live in Bridgeport. I used to live around the corner from this. And so I would just notice this like huge hulking mass from the alleyway. I'm like, what is this? And it's designed by the same architects as the Music Box. And it was the bigger sister to it, basically. Its origins is it was like funded entirely by the Lithuanian community in Bridgeport that used to be really big and powerful. Kind of like formed a corporation, and you would just send money, and it would be this point of pride for the whole community.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really beautiful. It, of course, then closed in the 80s or so, and it sat vacant for a bit and really like got kind of gross, but it recovered.
Yeah. I had a sister who used to live in Bridgeport, and I actually saw this place before it was renovated. It was right next to this Godzilla themed toy store, and the theater was boarded up with like metal panels that said like fireproof. And it was just like a very like derelict 80s vibe.
Yeah, no, because it closed in that time. Its last movie it showed was like Police Academy 3 or something. And the first thing it showed was like some Charlie Chaplin movie. I'm trying to think. It might have been The Great Dictator, actually. Yeah. But yeah, that store you're talking about, the Godzilla store, is Monster Island Toys. I remember like walking past that. They kept very small hours, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Very niche store. But, you know, I always sing the praises of local businesses. But if rents are low enough for a Godzilla figurine store to like operate and pay rent, then that means your commercial corridor is dying. It should be bustling enough to price out hobby stores, niche hobby stores. And that's also like, it's so weird for him to have a storefront. Like that is the perfect thing to like run online. I think they had a much larger online presence that makes more sense for, you know, Godzilla enthusiasts. I can't imagine how much they can draw being in Bridgeport in the south side of Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad the Ramova Theater reopened. It reopened due to like 49 investors, including Chicago natives, Quincy Jones, Jennifer Hudson, and Chance the Rapper. And I love him for doing that. Chance the Rapper has a bit of a place in my heart because when I was like a teenager, I would go to the library a lot, to their downtown U-Media space, which is at the Harold Washington Library. And that was where he recorded his first mixtape, Acid Rap. Yeah. And I would see him perform it there, and he knew, you know, lots of people in Chicago, and I vaguely kind of knew him. And he's continued to sort of like care about how the city's doing. Yeah. Like he gave, I think, $1 million to CPS. He like ran an open mic series through the library called Open Mic, spelled with a K. And yeah, this is another way of him like sort of trying to make sure the city is doing well. And I appreciate it.
When Black Panther came out, I think he rented out like school gyms and got projectors to show kids the movies, because there is now in Chatham, where he's from, but there was for a period no movie theaters on the south side of Chicago.
Wow.
Which is crazy. There's one in Hyde Park, the Harper Theater down there. That's a classic like movie palace that got renovated and split up into multi-screen. But yeah, like in huge swaths of the south side. Like that's why if you go to like the Roosevelt Icon movie theaters, it's like can be so full of people on the weekends. It's taking essentially the like entire load of the south side movie going populace. But yeah, I stopped by the Ramova Theater today. I figured I had some time this afternoon, so I grabbed lunch with a friend over there because there was a Ramova grill attached to it, because same setup as a music box. You've got commercial space on the first floor. And so now they have like a brew pub and restaurant in there. And so I've been like really tracking the opening of this. It took me a while to get down there, but I lived in Bridgeport at the time. In January 2020, I went to the community meeting about the renovation for the Ramova Theater. This is right before COVID, so I was so optimistic. I was like, oh man, once they put shovel to the ground here, like this is going to be amazing. And it's, I mean, 3 years later, it did happen. Like it's cool to see. But yeah, it was also like, you go to a community meeting, it's exactly what you think it is. It's very old people, very concerned about parking.
Yeah.
It's like, it was before I was into urbanism or really knew any of that stuff. But I just remember having that first thought of like, all right, so you moved in across the street from a movie theater that was closed, and now you're very angry that it's opening, and you're surprised too. Like you moved in there, unless you moved in before 1929. Like then, yeah.
Yeah. But when you were there, did you see the part of the building that got hit by a bus?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
It's very noticeable. Yeah. When did that happen? That was like last week.
Yeah. A CTA bus crashed into the building.
Yeah. Insider knowledge here. My friend heard this through the police officer who was there. The bus driver fell asleep at the wheel.
Oh.
Yeah. But yeah, it was crazy. Like it hit this like kind of, not by the marquee, thank God. But yeah, like it was really a hit. Like it really destroyed some terracotta, and it wasn't like a super decorative part, but replicating terracotta is always really, really hard. So that's going to suck.
Yeah. And they just spent a ton of money fixing it up. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I bet they're insured. Right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But also it was very full of people in there. I hope they have a lot of success. It's kind of they're kind of like the first guard of renovating, of bringing life into the Halstead corridor down in Bridgeport.
Yeah.
But it was chock full of people. There was like a community market thing there when I went there. There was a whole bunch of people selling candles and hot sauces and stuff. There is a very small fest, and there were 2 hot sauce vendors there, which I feel, it reminded me of the Great Lakes episode where we talked about like, there's never going to be the same level of industry in the Great Lakes. We might as well just like sell Etsy stuff to each other, create a small craft economy. And that's what it felt like at this thing. It was just like, oh, cool, a t-shirt with a screen printed logo on it. Like a ghost pepper hot sauce. Oh, a second competing ghost pepper hot sauce.
Yeah. I mean, I went there once like a couple of months ago because I had heard from a coworker at the library who works at a different branch that like he's involved with like a Bridgeport community aid organization. And he was like, oh yeah, we're having like a event where we're selling off all the extra clothes that were donated for migrants, but we have more than we need and we're selling it off for $1. And I was like, that sounds amazing. And then I went and it all sucked. And all I found were like 2 ties, and then I gave them to you for your birthday.
Yay. It wasn't all worthless. Yeah. And then I want to give a quick shout out at the end of this to like historic theaters out in the Chicago suburbs, because like during this period, like, yes, people would go downtown to see movies, but then Balaban and Katz also like met people where they were, because people went to the movies frequently enough to like justify having one, not just close to work, but close to their homes. But then a lot of Chicago suburbs had really beautiful downtown movie theaters, like on their cute little main street, you know, like next to the pharmacy and all that. But I found this guy online, Chris Johnson, who runs Classic Theaters. So he says he's addicted to renovating old theaters, which is so cute. He's like in this WGN interview, and he's like, you know, some people are addicted to golf or drinking, but my thing is renovating old movie theaters. And they've done 16 so far, and they're like all across kind of Chicagoland. But I noticed they're kind of in 2 types of places in Chicagoland. It has like these places like Downers Grove and Elmhurst that were like standalone, fully functioning towns that then later got absorbed into Chicagoland.
Yeah.
Like once the car was made, and then like old streetcar suburbs like Oak Park and Berwyn. So I think that having a movie palace is a good metric of like if that suburb has good bones. Like, can this actually be turned into a non-car reliant place? It's like, did it have a movie theater in the 20s? Because places that don't pass this test is like Arlington Heights.
Yeah. I mean, what if your neighborhood had 50 nickelodeons?
Yeah, that would be a perfect neighborhood.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then there's this book I'm meaning to read, Chicagoland, City and Suburbs in the Railroad Age. And I feel like I was arriving at this kind of dichotomy here, and this author has already figured that out, that she says for all the Chicago suburbs, like you can kind of put them into 4 different categories of their origins. They were either a farm center, an industrial center, like a streetcar suburb, that's Oak Park and Berwyn, and then recreational institutional centers. And so I think that each type then gets flattened and turned into a commuter suburb once the car is invented. But the quality of life you get there, I think the origins do matter. Like Arlington Heights, it was a racetrack, it was some country clubs, and then later it got turned into suburbs in the 50s and 60s. And I think it's like the worst over there versus the other ones that actually had like some reason to exist. So I'd say the best candidates are streetcar suburbs. After that, maybe agricultural, industrial after that, because it's going to be a little grosser, just due to like land use stuff. And then surprisingly recreational at the bottom. You wouldn't think it would be. You think it'd be a nice, pretty place, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, I think the worst of it is just like an exurb that was just farmland with nothing built on it.
Oh, yeah,
like the ones built
nothing.
in the 2000s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's
like,
rock bottom.
Yeah. Those are just like too blank of a slate. Like you need a little something to fight against there. But yeah. And then personal experiences with movie theaters. As I said earlier, I'm just a fan of the movie going experience. In COVID, it was one of the things I really missed. I was really excited to go back to. I guess it comes from childhood and stuff. Like growing up on military bases, movie theater was just like, not that we were starved of stuff to do. It's Germany. It's a beautiful place. But it was one of those things that made me feel like American when I felt like I was losing that sometimes.
Yeah.
Was we'd go to the movie theater, we'd see American movies. And they were like single screen movie theaters. Actually, there was 3 military bases in Germany where I was. And each one had like a small movie theater. Some were nicer than the others. But yeah, they'd play the national anthem before each one, and everyone would stand up, put their hand over their heart. That was just something I thought all movie theaters had growing up, and I learned that was not the case. But yeah, and then being in the lobby before, like if there's one showing in one movie, like you just all be in the lobby before and after. And so my dad would see friends from work and all that, and I'd see kids from school that I knew. It felt like it was a very tight-knit community around the Air Force Base. But yeah, that's probably where it started for me.
And then for me, I guess like one like really good memory I have is of going to the Davis Theater, which is the theater in Lincoln Square. And I went there with like my classmates to see Twilight. And it was before I'd even heard what Twilight was, because it only really got big once the movie came out. Mm-hmm. And I saw the movie like before I'd even really heard of the book. I just showed up because some friends invited me. And yeah, it was nice to just like have that experience, because I realized talking with you a few days ago that like I would only ever hang out with friends like in their houses or my house. That was like the only time in middle school I ever hung out with people like and did something like that where we were like in a place spending money to do something. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I like that. And then the Davis Theater though, this is an example of what you're talking about with like the sort of movie palaces that were big enough to be split up into multiplexes. Cause like it has a really beautiful second story. It has like original terracotta, but the first floor is like this really ugly, like big tile that's like sunburnt orange and maroon. It's very 70s. Mm-hmm. And like, I still am nostalgic, but like, I hate that with buildings in Chicago when you see like a really nice second story and then the first floor sucks. Like you see this especially at the intersection of the city of like Belmont, Clark, and what's the other one? Ashland. Yeah.
Yeah. It's this weird thing. Like, maybe the Davis never fully cratered, it never fully went bad. So that meant in the 60s and 70s, they were still operating, they were still open. And so they're like, oh, let's renovate. That's what people want. And they put in really ugly stuff. It probably would have been better for it just to be like the Ramova and just completely go kaput, and then it can be like gutted and redone. I see that with like, I don't know, if places have maintained a kind of level of wealth, then you have to, when you renovate the home, you have to tear out everything from the 70s and 80s. But if you're like renovating a Greystone in Bronzeville, like that was completely burned out, it's like, all right, blank slate, we're good to go. There's no asbestos in here because there was no one moving in the 50s to install it. Like it's been completely dead for that period of time. It's like sometimes continuous wealth can be in the way of like, I don't know, aesthetics.
Yeah.
It's a weird problem.
Economic decline is the best thing for architectural preservation. Like that's why downtown LA is so great.
Yeah, frozen in time.
Yeah. And then another like sort of nice memory I have about movie theaters was seeing the movie Ratatouille. And then afterwards, my dad, we convinced him to go let us like buy rats at a pet store. And so we got like 3 rats. And then like they were meant to be feeder rats for snakes. So they're kind of inbred and they all had health problems, but they were alive for a few years.
Wow.
And they were nice.
That's amazing. I bought turtles in Chinatown once during Chinese New Year in Las Vegas. And then you learn that like they're going to grow to be huge and very resource intensive. And then so luckily I was able to give them to a pet store. The guy had already taken in 2 turtles from another kid who had been suckered into buying Chinatown turtles. And he said, I already named the first 2 Raphael and Donatello, so I might as well have 2 more turtles. And I was like, yeah, you see. But he seemed like he like didn't fully want them, but it was nice of him.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. But yeah. And then my other memory of movie theaters is in Las Vegas, where all the movie theaters are inside casinos. Cause like, I think we had some, there was a standalone one over where I lived out west that was in a strip mall, but then putting it in a casino is a pretty smart move, especially the ones, these are like the outer, this is a style of casino that like really only came about in the 2000s, like the neighborhood casino, an off strip casino, that was, serving tourists. I mean, it has a hotel on it, but yeah, it was a nicer, newer one called Red Rock Casino. But just for me, like the memory of seeing the movies is like you walk in, you see the garish carpeting, you smell the cigarettes. It's a very unique experience in modern America, indoor smoking, but that's what Las Vegas is all about. Yeah, and you go see a movie. That's where our bowling alleys were too. So as kids, like our like outside the house high school recreation was largely in casinos, surprisingly.
But no, that's interesting because like I feel like in the modern world, you know, children's spaces and adult spaces are so separate. Like that's why it sounds so sort of sacrilegious. It's because children often have dedicated spaces that they're only allowed in. And so for them to even pass through an adult only space seems kind of odd.
Yeah. No, that's always something I like about being in Europe is that they don't bifurcate adults and children as much. Like German beer gardens are as much a place about drinking as they are about like having food with your family. They just don't they don't feel the need to slice things up like we do in America.
Yeah. And I hate that in like so many different social settings now, it's okay for you to bring a dog to somewhere, but not like a child. Like you can bring your dog to work, but not your baby. Yeah. That like pisses me off.
No, yeah, the dogs reign supreme. Yeah. And then so the aesthetics of the multiplex and of like modern movie theaters, we've talked about like the great movie palaces were often done in these beautiful revival styles. They were like looking to the past. They'd be like Venetian revival, Spanish Rococo. The really zany ones were the Egyptian ones, the Oriental theater, there's Mayan ones. Like they were truly like searching every corner of the globe, Ottoman, Moorish revival, like anything. And then I think they kind of exhausted that basically. I think once they had done every culture. And then so right at the end in the late 20s, early 30s, the great movie palaces were done in Art Deco style, which was really beautiful. So like, I think the Radio City Music Hall in New York City could be seen as a high water mark of this like style of movie theater. It was actually opened as a stage performance place, but they changed it in 2 weeks to become a movie theater, which I think is really funny. And then it's kind of gone back to live performances since. But yeah, as we've mentioned, like love Art Deco, you know, it's like in the interwar modernism episode, it's like, I think it has a lot more charm than like stark interwar modernism. It's got more like panache.
Yeah, I mean, it's consistently found to be Americans' favorite architectural style. And there's been a recent resurgence of like Art Deco buildings, like New York City, the Brooklyn Tower looks pretty Art Deco. They have another one that's made out of like terracotta, like new terracotta.
Oh, wow.
A new terracotta Art Deco skyscraper. I forget the name. It might be like the Morgan or something like that.
Nice.
But yeah, like there has been this like resurgent interest in it. But it still gets criticism from architectural critics because they're just so dead set on proving to people that like, no, low key, the public this whole time, you know, they can like minimalism. Yeah.
The people, they yearn for Mies van der Rohe.
Yeah. They just stuck on thinking they need to educate the public when the public has clearly had a preference for ornament detail forever. It's just like maybe a brief period in the 60s that people liked minimalism.
Yeah. That's why I like Richard Nickel, because he's like a snob of the people, you know, that it's like, he's like, I felt like he was fighting the few for the will of the many. Like, because if you just, people weren't thinking about the Garrick Theater, but if you took the average Chicagoan off the street then and off the street now, they would agree, oh yeah, that's a beautiful building. Oh, they're tearing it down. That's terrible. Like, it's just a very like immediate thing. I do think that sometimes like some mid-century modern architecture, like it's a lot harder sell for now that preservation has become, you know, something we have to do as well in the past few decades is, you know, preserving mid-century great architecture, but you have to explain it to people sometimes like, no, it's actually very sumptuous and beautiful in its use of materials and symmetry. And the average person is like, okay.
Yeah, it's like the Thompson Center.
Yeah, and then postmodernism is also a hard sell to people of like, no, you see the tomato the tomato red color on the outside is actually very beautiful.
Well, that's not getting preserved. Google is, you know, remodeling the building and it's all going to be like clear glass and things like that.
Man. That is one thing I noticed. So when I went to the Ramova today, I didn't get to go all the way into like the actual performance space in there, which I was annoyed about. I kind of thought about sneaking in. But in their lobby, I noticed they kind of grazed it up. They kind of millennial grazed it. All the walls are white. So the inside of it is supposed to feel like you're in a Spanish courtyard. Yeah. And so they painted all what would be Adobe, like not Adobe, but stucco. That's all white. And then all the detailing and stuff is like gray. And that's no way that's how it was in the past. It would have been probably very saturated kind of garish colors. And I just felt like they're so close. I'm surprised. Like, have a little bit of fun.
I'm surprised to hear you say that because for me, actually, I thought the exterior of the building is kind of tacky because you can tell it's like imitation.
It is
marble or something. It's not real. But the interior to me felt like better. I actually liked the lobby a lot.
I don't know. I think that they wanted to make it look clean is one thing. It's kind of like it's when landlords renovate like older units too. There's like, let's do white everywhere. Let's paint over the stained trim. Like we want things to seem clean and light and open because no one's ever been in a place and be like, oh, this is too this is too bright and sunny. Like people don't often say that. But it can be done in a proper way. You can have dark tones and contrast. People like contrast.
But to circle back to the Art Deco and movie theaters thing. So yeah, I think that like movie theaters and Art Deco are a little bit synonymous. I think that by default, when people envision a movie theater in their mind, they envision something that like loosely mirrors Art Deco. And so you can see this in like modern movie theaters that are built from scratch to a degree, like the Regal Cinema in Chicago. Based off how it looks, I would say it was built in the 2000s probably. Yeah. But if you look at it, it's really not evident, but just like something very vaguely still just like looks like Art Deco. Like it can't escape it.
Yeah. It's the name from the Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute. I love how official their name sounds, but they are a website of just very dedicated people who, amass aesthetics and stuff. They're from the world of Arena as well. That website also for like logging aesthetics.
I mean, they originally like formed around McBling and Y2K, those Facebook groups. And they've kept trucking. They've figured out every aesthetic they can.
It really seems like it. So they call this Decoplex. So it's taking the Deco part from Art Deco and then Plex from the multiplex. And so there's a lot more like neon and just the flourishing parts basically of Art Deco, but then applied to the construction reality of building these just like concrete boxes out in the suburbs. So it's very like ornamentation heavy. But yeah, I would say Regal cinemas in general, like even in their, not just architecture, but their graphic design kind of plays into this style as well.
I feel like the insides usually feel a bit more Art Deco than the outsides because the outsides of modern theaters are still like lacking largely.
It is it's built in the same way as a Walmart. Like they can try and make it look different on the outside, but it's like the same construction
it'll
style.
Be a Walmart maybe plus like a small marquee and a neon sign, which is more than a Walmart.
But it's like, it is like, even with the beautiful movie palaces of the past, like there's nothing about the programming of the inside of a theater, like how people use the space, that is conducive to an interesting outside. It's kind of irrespective of it, like it doesn't need to show anything off on the inside. There's like, you can make it look like whatever. So I think the first approach was to go get zany with it. Like there's no reason it can't look like a Mayan temple, so let's do it. And then the later period in the 90s, it's just like it doesn't have to be anything different from a concrete box. Why like kid ourselves?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if movie theaters never lost, and construction at large, if it never lost the ability to be ornate, I feel like movie theaters would look would have exteriors that like matched IPs. Like there'd be like movie theaters that looked like Star Wars from the outside and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually a good kind of way to dovetail into talking about Alamo Drafthouse, because when it comes to like modern movie theaters changing how things are done, like Alamo Drafthouse is this upstart out of Austin, Texas, who started opening movie theaters, some of them in old movie palaces, but they've also built ground up ones as well in strip malls and suburban locations. But yeah, you've never been, right?
No, I've never been, but I actually wanted to talk about this. I was the one who added this to the docket because, thinking about the evolution of theaters from vaudeville to nickelodeons to movie palaces to drive-thrus to multiplexes, this is the only innovation recently. It's a small one, but basically having theaters that like have the ability to order food and have it brought to you like it's a restaurant, because AMC has copied this model too. Yeah. But yeah, Alamo Drafthouse Theaters, which the Drafthouse makes it sound like so millennial, but they started in 1997, and like, I've never been to one, but I became aware of them pretty recently because More Perfect Union released a video on like how one of the Alamo Drafthouse locations is trying to unionize, and I watched it and I became aware that like they serve food because the workers were saying like they're more likely to trip and hurt themselves because they have to like duck with the food.
Yeah, like little ninjas. They skirt around in there. It's really strange.
Yeah. I mean, when we went to the AMC Theater dine-in location to see Civil War recently, that I was like excited because I was like, oh yeah, this will be cool. I've never been to like a dine-in theater. I wonder what it's like. And then we didn't order food, and I don't think anyone else did. And so I don't know. Do people actually like go to the Alamo theaters and buy food?
Yes. So I really do I respect the ethos of Alamo Drafthouse. I don't know. The best thing you can say about startups in general is like when they're formed out of a sense of like, there's something missing in the consumer experience here. There is like, if you just you can make a pretty good business off of just listing the complaints the average person has about an entertainment source or a consumer product and just addressing those first of all. And so like a common complaint is like the seats in front are very bad. And so I watched this video on the Alamo Drafthouse, like movie theater architect. And so they have a different formula for deciding where seats should start. So their first seats are actually pretty far back and nice. And so little stuff like that. And this is so that's solving a problem. But another one is that like, people like popcorn, but what if there was something a little more in a movie theater? It's also very smart because that's where a lot of the money is made, is in concessions. But like, instead of just charging, famously, I think popcorn sells for 9 times the amount that it costs to make. Yeah. It's got an amazing profit margin. Also, weird aside, but one of the best profit margins is Tiger Balm. That stuff, that like you can buy it from pharmacies. It's like a pain relief kind of cream gel. It's very like minty. That is like costs nothing to produce. I think it's like a factor of 100 or something, or how much you can sell it for. We can cut that out.
What's it made out of though?
I don't know. We must blend up tigers or something.
Seed oils.
Seed oils, 100%.
No, whenever I walk into a Walgreens now, it's shocking how like convenience stores, I can look at every single product and I know information as a consumer about how it's toxic or bad for me. Like even like I used to go to like say like a Walgreens and like the nuts were healthy. No, they're actually roasted with seed oils. Like there's nothing that they sell that isn't bad for you.
I will say we're definitely being a little orthorexic here. We're talking about our worries about health and stuff, but I hate American grocery stores because they're huge and there's too many options and stuff. That's why I like Aldi. It just reminds me when I was a kid in the Penny Mart in Germany. But if you go into an American grocery store knowing how bad so much of the stuff is for you, it actually makes the decision-making process a lot easier because large parts of the grocery stores do not exist for me, basically. And so there's a lot like fewer places.
Yeah, how they have like 30 flavors of Oreos or like goldfish crackers. Like, I primarily try to shop from like the produce section. And I don't even like to bag my produce unless I have to because like I want to see it like not in a bag because that tells me it's healthy.
Okay.
Yeah, like other people say they buy like 3 oranges. They want to put them in a bag out of convenience. I want to see the oranges so that I'm telling myself that like
you're losing me.
Produce.
I think I can put an orange in a bag and not lose the concept of it being a healthy thing. It's just you put it in a bag. Who cares? It's the same orange.
No, because this is something that like doctors and like nutritionists will tell people who like have very low literacy for like nutrition. They'll tell them like avoid foods in boxes or bags. And so for me, like it not being in a box or bag, I see it and I'm like, it's healthy.
That's fair. All right. I do try and avoid, like, if they have a vegetable and they have the same vegetable and they've packaged it, I'll try and go for the loose vegetable.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'll do that one. Yeah. But I'll put it in whatever bag I damn well please. Yeah. And so back on
Alamo Theaters.
Yeah. Alamo Drafthouse. So their whole thing is that it's this dedication to the movie going experience. And so they're very strict on cell phone use, which I like. I appreciate that. Very strict on talking during the movie, I think too. But then they undercut that by, in this goal of, like, they have two opposing goals. They want to serve you all this great food. And it is good food. It's like elevated bar food. I'm a sucker for that. Maybe I'm just average American Joe on that. But the way they bring it to you is that, like, these people work there are hunched over so they don't disrupt your viewing of the movie, and then they just waddle over to where you are. And that cannot be good, hunching over like that. But yeah, so I hope they do have good luck unionizing. My rugby team, we go around to businesses in our area and we ask for, like, donations for this fundraiser that we do. And so we went in there and we asked them, and they immediately shut us down because, as I'm sure you know, like, all their locations are not franchises or anything. They are entirely corporately owned. And I think this desire to have such a tight control over the user experience is why they're so anti-union, because that creates another player there. But I think it causes them to shoot themselves in the foot, because they have a kind of a prescriptivist thing of, like, we know what the consumer wants and we will give it to them and no one's going to get in the way. I don't know. I think sometimes you have to relinquish a little ounce of control over your product. Sometimes, like, you don't get to have a say in everything.
I mean, when a company is still in, like, the growth phase and they're getting private equity investing in them and things like that, they oftentimes, like, if they get, like, a union, they just, all that funding will get shut off. Yeah. And I kind of am a little bit sympathetic to them, like, needing to avoid that at all costs. Yeah. Because I can see how it will, but yeah, this goes back to, like, something I wrote in the docket. It's like, I just immediately look at Alamo Drafthouse and, like, yes, it's this small innovation in movie theaters, but, like, any sort of, like, new company that's saying they're reinventing the wheel, reinventing the wheel, it's like, I was immediately suspicious. I was like, they're probably not profitable, and, like, they'll go the way of, like, Foxtrot and, like, shut down out of the blue. And then I looked and, like, they actually had already fired for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2021.
Yeah, and they're just still going. Yeah. Chapter 11 is the one where you just get to keep going, basically. Yeah. It's not where you dissolve yourself. But yeah, I think there must be a path to profitability, just because, like, a lot of the movies, the ticket sales go to the studios more so. They get a lion's share of it. And so that's refocusing on concessions makes sense. But larger seats means they have less people in each viewing. So there's a lot of stuff that's probably undercutting them. I'm sure they've run the math on it in their business plan, but COVID is also something they couldn't have predicted.
Yeah. I just hate, though, how, like, even companies I love that are new, I just can't look at them and assume that they'll be here, like, a year or two from now. Like, it's just, have you ever heard of, like, Hypernormalization, the movie by Adam Curtis? Like, he talks about how the USSR, like, all the citizens could tell, like, something was wrong, but the government was, like, telling people everything was normal and fine. And our economy feels like that, where it's like, there's just so many signs that, like, something is deeply wrong. And, like, just the fact that, like, all of these new companies aren't even trying to be profitable, and like, they all just, like, vanish out of the blue. It's like, something's wrong.
No, it's a deep, like, I don't know. It feels like we're forgetting the fundamentals of stuff. Like, we've talked about doing a venture capital episode, but, like, just, it perverts, like, the motivations of a business so much. It's never about individual profitability or a business plan. It's about growth at all costs and then flipping the switch and, having a soft monopoly. Like, just reach market share and then drive up the prices. Like, we'll figure it out when we get there kind of approach. And it just doesn't feel like that's just so divorced. It's what they talk about in Strong Towns. It's catastrophic money. It's, like, more money than things should be given. True. But what also kind of, I don't know, makes me skeptical of Alamo Drafthouse is just pure vibes alone. It has very, like, Reddit vibes of, like, I mean, I care about movies and stuff, but it feels like it's really for people who love movies and care about them and have strong opinions on which Coen Brothers movie is best.
Like the type to get tattoos of movies on their body.
Yes, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I don't know. We have, like, big film nerd friends and stuff, and I love them dearly, but I always feel like I can't hold a candle to that. Like, I haven't seen anything by Jean-Luc Godard. Like, I can't. I'm just a guy who likes going to the movie theater.
Yeah, I'm not ever going to be, like, a film head. My tastes aren't good enough. Speaking of, as like a final question, so are there any like movies we want to see that are currently in theaters or coming out soon?
I need to I used to go on the Apple website and they had the movie trailers on there, and I would just watch trailers on there. I would just do that instead of YouTube sometimes. So right now I can't think of anything too much that I'm waiting for.
Yeah, I mean, when I get YouTube ads for movie trailers, I don't skip them. I actually will like watch the full 2 minutes. But yeah, for me, I want to watch Megalopolis, which we'll probably do an episode on it because I think would you be interested in that one?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
The trailer was vague enough that I don't really know too much about what it's about, which is kind of why I avoid trailers because they show too much nowadays. It's a very common complaint. But yeah, I like that it was vague enough. I can't really say what it will be about, but I'm very down to do it.
Well, I want to do it because I like the aesthetic, and the aesthetic alone tells me I like it. But also because we can talk about Megalopolises in general. We can have the second half of the episode be on that.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the only other thing that like sort of is catching my eye, which will make you and other people laugh, is I kind of want to watch Inside Out 2.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I never saw the first one, but people liked it. I know it's the therapy movie, and you always say that. But no, Pixar still has a place in my heart.
Yeah. Because researching for this episode to get me excited about maybe going to a movie theater. And I would like to go to one now. And that's the only one in theaters that kind of appeals to me. Because honestly, like movies with like adult themes oftentimes kind of turn me off. Like, I don't want to watch people like drinking and killing each other. Like, I honestly like do kind of like kids movies more a lot of the time.
I strangely like usually I disagree with that, but I don't know what it was. I guess I've had a stressful bit at work or something, but I just really wanted to watch movies that did not have stakes in them, like high stakes, where like a lot can be given up. And then I just ended up watching like Furiosa, which is just a lot of agony and pain and stuff. I don't know why I was so sensitive recently, but yeah, I just wanted to feel good. I think I was actually in that mood for once where I was like, no, I want to see like, I don't want anything bad to happen to people. I want it all to be good. But that's just a phase, I think. Then I want like, every so often I want to watch a really harrowing movie, something that really sticks with me. Maybe it's a masochistic kind of side of me.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of like movies that like deal with like the real world more, I guess the sort of genre that like has recently become popular through The White Lotus and like movies like, what was it? The Dinner.
Yeah, The Dinner. And then also not just White Lotus, but the Glass Onion, Knives Out, those things that like aren't rich people evil movies.
I do like genre. Those actually. And Don't Look Up was really good.
Oh.
Yeah. That genre does appeal to me. But yeah, overall, like, I don't have good taste. I'm sorry.
No, I don't know. I'd be more wary of the person who says they have good taste than like you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess one thing I do want to talk about is like, I don't know, like this episode it's about movie theaters. It's not really about movies. But just the kind of feedback between them, like it must be so hard to anticipate what people want. Cause like people do get tired of stuff. So like when TVs came out, in the 40s and 50s, there was this pivot of like, oh, we got to do what you can't get on TV. We have to really do what movies are good at, which is scale and size. And so they'd have these like crazy widescreen formats. You just make the screen larger and wider, like as much as you could possibly do, just to be like, aha, I can't get that on your 4x3 like television screen. But then a lot of those flopped. And then that kind of drove this period in the 70s of auteur cinema and like New Hollywood and these directors.
What is auteur cinema?
So that's like very director driven.
Okay.
Like directors did not matter as much. When the studios were stronger in the previously studio system of the golden age of Hollywood, studio like had large creative control. They would tell you what actors you were going to use. They would source the script and they would produce, and then there would be a director to not mess things up, basically. But the director then became much more of a visionary kind of role in it. They would find a script they like and they would bring it to the studio, and it kind of like, I don't know, upended things in that direction. And then that is what kind of broke through this lull in movie attendance in the 70s. And so the 70s, like, I don't know, always the decade that comes up a lot in this podcast, but it was able to have the blockbuster in it, like this big mass appealing movie. But it was also a period where like surprise hits happened with like Taxi Driver and like darker in tone anti-hero movies that the old Hollywood would have said no to because there wasn't a dance number in it and there wasn't like a sharply attractive leading man. Like, I don't know, it was in a period of big flops, they made a lot of small bets on interesting directors. And then people hope that that's happening now with Marvel fatigue, is the idea of like, oh, people are tired of Marvel movies. There's been some big surprise hits. Saltburn really drove a lot of people to movie theaters. A24 gets a banger all the time. Like, so people see us like maybe entering a stage like that. But this is a cyclical thing. Like, Hollywood wants to have the spectacle movies, and then people tire of them, and then they do kind of Oscar baity movies too. Like, they're in this constant state trying to figuring stuff out. The Oscars for Best Picture used to actually split in two. They used to have like Best Movie and then Best like Spectacle Movie, and that would solve so many like Oscar debates every year, because there's always a big flashy like. That way you could give Avengers Endgame an Oscar and it wouldn't take it away from whatever, beautiful Oscar bait movie there was that year, because it respects the fact that there's going to be small, intimate stories, driven by personal experience. And there's going to be like aliens getting blown up on a giant screen. And both of those are like the testament to what film is capable of.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit more suspicious that like Marvel as an IP, I think will fall in importance just because it was too popular.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I do think that just like the internet allows people to sort of like access worlds and like engage with like media that like was more difficult and like much more nerdy back in the day. Like, for example, if you like Star Wars in the 80s, you could get the VHSs and watch them over and over again by yourself. And you could buy action figures and posters and stare at them. But like, you couldn't like engage in like the world as much as you can now. Like, you can just look at their like Star Wars, not Wikipedia. What do you call the fandom? Wikipedia. Well, I knew that word. I was avoiding saying it because it's so cringe.
It's such an L to admit that you know what Wikipedia is.
Yeah, I've been on it before. Okay. But yeah, it's just like IPs people can enjoy them now in a way that like took so much more work. And I do think that like they're going to have some enduring importance through the internet.
With Star Wars in particular, I'm just gonna nerd out, I guess. But there was this beautiful world of like extended universe like novels and stuff. I knew a guy who would read these voraciously. Like, they were really big to people. But like, once Star Wars was revived after the Clone Wars, or after the sequels and into the third bit, they really like wiped all that off the slate, and to make all this new content, they kind of disregarded all these strange novelizations that were made in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And so there was like, if you were nerdy and determined enough, there was more to the Star Wars world. But now you don't have to be nerdy or determined enough. Like, it's just log on your computer, watch one of the 4 Star Wars shows, read the Wikipedia articles about it. Yeah, I don't know, the expectation, I don't know. We're in a weird period of like world building and lore. I kind of don't like the loreification of a lot of media, of how every little nook and cranny of a world has to be explored. I always hold up like that Nurse Ratched series as like the point of the worst it got, where it's just like, didn't you ever wonder where Nurse Ratched came from, where she became who she is? It's like, no, she was very interesting as a character in a larger story. Like, nothing you can show me is going to be more like interesting than the mystique around someone like that. I mean, like,
I didn't even watch the movie she came from, but I did watch a few episodes of that with someone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did find the scene where she talks about Peaches really funny.
I haven't seen it.
Wait, you haven't seen it? But
I haven't seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. No.
Oh, see, I didn't watch that, but yeah. But no, Nurse Ratched's like a lot of shows where like, I only watched a few episodes, but like a few episodes in, there were like scenes of people, I think, ripping their own arms off, and just transgression in the modern world. It's just like, we're past the point where like shock value can be entertaining. It's just weird now. It's not like a good move.
I say this, I love shows where people don't die. I think you have to get a lot craftier with the stakes. Mad Men, I think that's why I've been enjoying it so much. One of the many reasons I've been enjoying it is just that like the stakes are like, God, I hope we figure out this merger right. It's like, there are some deaths in there, but it's the kind of deaths that would happen in regular life. And so that's why they feel much more grounded. It's not like people getting killed by cartels and stuff. Like,
does the guy who had the heart attack in the first season die eventually?
I'm not going to spoil stuff.
Oh, okay. No, well, that's good for our listeners. Okay.
But yeah. I also haven't finished the show, so I can't even fully spoil it either.
Wait, ever?
I have 3 episodes left. I'm working on it.
Okay.
Yeah. I know it's been happening over the course of a year, but I'm a slow watcher.
I would have assumed that you'd watched the whole series before you started dressing like how you do.
What? No. So I started dressing like how I do, but I on purpose didn't watch Mad Men because I was afraid it would impact me. I was like, if I'm getting into this whole mid-century like classic menswear thing, I got to like do it my own way and then absorb more stuff with it. And then what happened is I started watching Mad Men. I just caught all the mistakes they made wardrobe wise when it comes to like, I don't know, inseam and text and like textile choices and stuff. But yeah, but mostly they do it very, very well. I mean, obviously they like won Emmys and stuff for costume design. But every so often they make the collars a little too small on Ken Cosgrove.
Yeah. I mean, I find it interesting that like with modern shows, they suck so much. Like the sound mixing is bad. The plot's bad.
Yeah. The wigs in House of the Dragon. That was a recent complaint by people.
No, I was about to say that I think the costuming is always really good, but I think that like in our current world, like culture still exists. People love consuming culture, but for some reason, like clothing is like the most important thing. I feel like it's as important as it's ever been, if not the most important it's ever been.
Yeah.
Because it's the last physical collection people have.
Yeah.
You can buy more of it than ever. Yeah. And then I feel like as a consequence, like on TV, when like there's period recreations, it's so good. I mean, the costuming is good in everything I watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's like, yeah, well, the further it goes back, the like, then I'm just more and more impressed. It feels like as it's more recent, like then I can use my own like kind of knowledge of stuff and try and catch mistakes. But no, great costuming really pushes a good movie over the edge, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's our retrospective on movie theaters and everything. All in all, I'm a big advocate of just going to the movies. I was kind of a sucker for that Nicole Kidman AMC thing, you know, when we've been to the movies and they get Nicole Kidman on there and she does this little like short film where she talks about how good movies are. Like, I don't know, that kind of speaks to me. Also, I always was very drawn to her.
Yeah, I really want to go to the movies soon, probably to watch Inside Out 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you live in a major American city, you likely have a beautiful movie palace that escaped demolition thanks to some dedicated film nerds in the 80s and a mix of public and private funding, as it often is. So you should go there and go see a movie or go see a stage play. That's often what they're turned into if they survive. But,
yeah, don't go to your local AMC. Go to like the locally run theater.
Exactly. All right. Cool. Thanks for listening.
Bye.